For more on this, we can now bring in Paul Melly, consulting fellow for the Africa Programma at Chatham House and an expert on the Sahel region. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Now,
Oh,
the FLA there says it has made further advances in the north after capturing Kidal. How big of a blow is this to the ruling military junta?
well, it's a practical military blow because the Tessalit base is particularly important. It has a major airstrip. So, in theory, that gives the FLA and its Islamist partner, the JNIM, the GSIM, a greater degree of autonomy. But there's also a big political blow because back in 2023, basically 2 or 3 years after seizing power in two military coups, the military junta decided to ask the United Nations to pull its peacekeeping force out of Mali, and it relaunched a military offensive against the separatists in the north, who had been in a peace agreement with the Malian government. And capturing Kidal was a really big step forward, and then taking control of the other places in the north that had been key centers either for the French or the UN presence, and also centers of northern Tuareg population. That was really important for the junta. It was seen as a sort of reaffirmation of national sovereignty, as an assertion, if you like, of the authority of central government over the country's most outlying regions. And so to see progressively places, Kidal the most emblematic, but now Tessalit, other places, the town of Ber, which is actually further south and actually on the river Niger. These places, to see these falling under the control of the separatists, and therefore reversing that reassertion of national sovereignty, that's a big political blow. And it sort of raises the question, was the military regime's agenda completely unrealistic, badly judged? If part of their agenda was to say we're not just fighting the jihadist groups, the groups that are labeled as terrorists, but we are going to reassert national sovereignty, national pride by ending the autonomy and decentralization in the north and ending the existence of a decentralized former separatist armed group. That agenda has now been completely undone. So this is a big blow, both in practical military terms, but also symbolically.
Now, Paul, as we know, the jihadists and the separatists joined up for those attacks that began last week. Why did they come together, since they don't have the same end goals, do they?
I think they came together because of practicality. It's a chance, if you like, for each of the groups to extend the overall impact of what they're doing. Because if you look at that map that of Mali that has appeared on the screen, you can see how geographically vast, how widespread the country is. And by attacking both in the far north up in Kidal and now taking over in Tessalit, which is right up by the border with Algeria, but also sustaining attacks around Bamako in the south, where the jihadists not only attacked the garrison center of Kati just outside the capital, but they've been attacking the supply routes, the fuel supply routes from the West African coast. That left the Malian armed forces hugely overstretched. And so this alliance between the separatists up in the north and the jihadists in the center and in the south, that's been the key to the success of their offensive over the last week or so. And if they'd continued to operate separately, they would both have obviously not been able to be so effective.
Now, Paul, when we were talking about what their goals are, the separatists, they want their homeland there in the north. The jihadists want Sharia law across Mali. So, with these diverging goals, how fragile is their alliance, and do you think it will hold?
I think the alliance will hold for two reasons. One is that back in the earlier Mali crisis, back in 2012, 2013, the separatists and the jihadists were allied, but then the separatists struck a peace deal under which they got decentralization, autonomy, if you like, for the north. But then, of course, they will have seen recently this military regime in Mali throw away that peace agreement. So they're going to be much more cautious about striking a separate deal. But there's also a wider context. There's been a resurgence of civilian political opposition in Mali, notably led by an imam, Mahmoud Diko, who is in exile in Algiers at the moment, but who has quite a lot of popular support. And he's formed a civil political grouping, if you like, with traditional civilian political opponents. And so there's a big push from all sides, if you like, of those opposed to the government to see if they can push the military regime into accepting that there should be some sort of negotiation about the route forward in Mali. Uh, Now, so far, the regime is holding out, and Russia, its key military ally, has asserted that it will back the Malian junta because obviously this is really important for the Russians to show that they can't be defeated. But over time and in reality, depending on how the events play out on the ground over the next few weeks, how the sort of power play works out, um, we could eventually see a move towards some sort of political route forward because it's, and in that context, everybody would have to compromise because it's not clear that the clearly the government would struggle to reassert military control
Yes.
over Mali. Even if it did a lightning raid on some of these northern towns, it might not be able to hold them. But
Yes.
equally, particularly for the jihadists, controlling Bamako, a city of millions of people, would be really difficult. So compromise may eventually become
Yes.
inevitable.
Yes. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate taking the time to speak with us. That's Paul Melly, Consulting Fellow for the Africa Program at Chatham House and an expert on the Sahel region.